Oregon's got big hype this year. Is that just going to be the case every year under Dan Lanning?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks with a buzz in the air. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch the show. We're this close to 6,000 subs on YouTube. I believe we can get there. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We'll talk Dan Lanning, future of the wide receiver room, and Oregon's offense in the Big Ten, which might be featuring some slick-looking helmets that Joey Harrington helped debut, all coming up on today's show. But I start with the hype around Oregon, which is as high as it has been since the 2014 season. Now, there you had third-year quarterback Marcus Mariota going into what would be his final year of college, and here you have, a very experienced quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, who is the preseason favorite, along with Carson Beck of Georgia, to win the Heisman Trophy right now. And you have a team that is as talented as any we have seen at Oregon in the last 10 years or so. And I got to thinking about the level of hype and expectation that going into every year, Oregon is going to should expect to be a playoff team. Because the 12-team playoff is happening at a time where Oregon is kind of striking the iron while it's hot in college football and elevating its recruiting footprint and just bringing in talent at a level that we haven't seen at Oregon before. Like a third straight top 10 class. That is not something that Oregon has ever achieved. And if they do that this year, which they're on track to do, you got DJ Pickett committing Wednesday and Trey McNutt later this week. More high-profile recruits in the class of 2025 will commit throughout July and August as well that are considering Oregon. And I just think about the way that Lanning and his staff have acquired talent. I think this is what it's going to feel like every year as long as the quarterback position is set. And I love the outlook of Oregon's quarterback room. I think it's as strong as any program in the country, including Texas, which has Arch Manning. Big name, talented guy, but Oregon's got Dante Moore and Austin Novosad to compete for the job next year, which I think, frankly, is even better than just having one or the other. Because if you were relying on Luke Moga, who I think is probably a guy that can push to be a starter in year 3, maybe even year 4, with the timeline of these Oregon quarterbacks and what the future of the room looks like, and you look at where Novosad and Moore are, like they're ready to compete for that, and you don't expect a true freshman to be there. I think having those two guys ready to start, because it will be their third season of college football. They're both 2023 recruits that they've had the opportunity to learn. I think the quarterback position is in a really, really good place. But the reason I say it's just going to come down to the quarterback every year is I don't see an indication that Oregon's recruiting is going to slow, that their talent acquisition in the transfer portal is going to do anything but continue to ratchet up. And I've made this point before, and I think it's a good one, as the Ducks go into this year with the second best odds to win the Big Ten and top 5 odds to win the national championship. Oregon's recruiting better than they ever have before, and going to the Big Ten is certainly a part of that. Dan Lanning has not won a conference championship yet. I'm not of the belief or, the misplaced narrative or thought that, well, he hasn't won a big game, he's got to do this, that, and the other thing. Like, no, he's won plenty of big games. He just hasn't won all the big games. And newsflash, nobody wins all of their big games in college football, not even, the greats. So I think for Lanning, he's in a great place, continuing to ascend and progress as a coach. But if the talent is at this level every year, you just need good quarterback play. You don't even need Heisman quarterback play. But when you get that, you can look at a season like 2014, and that's what Oregon's going to be able to put together on a fairly consistent basis, because the way that they're bringing in top 5 or 10 transfer portal classes and top 5 or 10 high school recruiting classes, I think allows quarterbacks to not just see Oregon as a favorable destination, but to allow them to thrive. It's one of the reasons I think Gabriel, by far, is going to have the best stats in the Big Ten this season for any quarterback, because he's got the best receiving core, arguably, in the Big Ten. You can look at Ohio State. That's completely fair. Oregon is, at worst, second in its receiving core. The O-line is going to be really good. The offensive coordinator is good. Like that's frankly the position, it's a coaching role, of course, but that's the position that might determine Oregon's annual success, because the rest of the roster talent just looks like it's going to be there over and over again, as Dan Lanning is becoming the best recruiter Oregon has ever had, which is crazy to say following Cristobal, who we know is a great recruiter, but Lanning is pulling in higher ranked classes. He brought in the highest rated class ever in the history of Oregon in 2024 and could very well beat that class depending on how these two commitments go later this week. So I love where Oregon's at. And did you know this about Dan Lanning? Because you probably didn't. I learned this earlier today. Thought Oregon fans might be intrigued to hear. So I'm here at SEC Media Days, hence the buzz around me for those listening on podcasts. I'm recording on Radio Row, and I went on a radio show in Montgomery, Alabama, and there was a story told to me by the host who mentioned Dan Lanning, because Rick Neuheisel every year puts on this event for coaches at Pebble Beach, and they come and play and whatnot. Apparently, Dan Lanning is a really good singer. Apparently, he was singing. I don't know if there's a video of it. I hope there is. I would love to see Dan get on the mic and showcase the pipes and see what he's got. Obviously, I can talk, but I can't sing at all. So I'm always a little bit extra impressed by people who can, because it's a really hard thing to do. But I never would have picked that for Dan Lanning. I mean, this guy can recruit. This guy runs a good program. This guy can add transfer portal players. He's, done all this stuff. But did you know that Dan Lanning can sing? I didn't. Apparently, he was singing the song Jesse's Girl, which is a very famous song. I'm sure most of you know it. And man, that guy just kind of does it all, which leads me to this question from Blazer Duck. Get yourself into the mailbag. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or if you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, go become a Locked On Ducks insider. Join the flock over at Subtext. Link in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. So Blazer Duck was asking about Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State. And he says, can you put into perspective just how crazy it is what Dan Lanning has been able to do with this year's recruiting class compared to the other three teams, what the other three teams do, and how very little they have to travel to land their recruits? Might be fun to talk about on your show and help other Oregon fans realizing how amazing of a job Dan Lanning and company are doing. It's mind-blowing. It's certainly impressive. And Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider, talks about it almost every time he comes here on the show. And I'm going to have him later this week for Friday's episode. Send me questions that you want for him. But I think that what Oregon has been able to do is overcome that obstacle to where it's something impressive. It's something to realize. But Lanning, I think, has made it an afterthought, because they can go to Maryland or to Georgia or to Florida or to Alabama, or they can go anywhere. And I think that Lanning has just sunk his teeth in on the recruiting trail so well that, yeah, Oregon doesn't have a ton of recruiting in its backyard, but it's about the relationships that you're able to foster and develop. And when you don't have kids that are close to home, when you are asking them to go halfway or all the way across the country, guys like Dallas Wilson, who I'm going to talk about in the next segment, or trying to get DJ Pickett from Florida, it can be a negative recruiting tool, because other coaches might say, look, we're Miami, we're just right here. If you want your family to come and easily see you play games, that's going to be the best way to do it. Otherwise, they have to watch you on TV. And look, to some kids and some families, that might be more of a priority than others. But gosh, if I'd been a college athlete, which was far from being the case, hence why I'm in this position, I think my parents would have wanted to be able to come and watch me play in person, and I know that a lot of them do. So I think it is extra impressive that we're talking about Dan Lanning in Oregon as a top 5 program in the country, as one of the best recruiting teams in the country, as pulling in top 5 classes potentially in consecutive years. The only schools ahead of Oregon in the 2025 recruiting cycle right now, with several 5 stars considering Oregon set to commit in the next couple weeks, are Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. And then it's Oregon. That's a wildly impressive place to be. And yeah, you have to do the extra legwork, but I think the foundation and the brand has been established so that Oregon fans should expect to continue to see that talent from all over the country flock itself to Eugene. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Oregon's wide receiver room has elevated to a place it's never been before with Junior Adams. Could guys be leaving that room in the next couple of years? We'll talk about that next. First, we're going to talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. No one is as hyped about eBay Motors as my boss, Zach Blackerby, who is behind the camera at this very moment. eBay Motors has everything you need. Look at him right here. He's so excited for eBay Motors, he's pumping it up. He's more excited for eBay Motors than he is for Auburn football, and he hosts Locked on Auburn. It's crazy because they've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, anything you need, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time and your money back, and you'll find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Different looking segment sip container right there for my everydayers out there. Okay, let's hop back into the mailbag here because we have many things to discuss in the wide receiver room. This question from Kevin, multi-part question, going in depth. We're absolutely loaded at wide receiver depth. I think we might be overstacked and fear someone will transfer out. Do Stewart and Gary Bryant Jr., that is, go to the NFL after the season? If not, who do you think will transfer out first, and how many? Does Oregon take a wide receiver in 2026? And then he lists Jurion Dickey, Kyler Casper, Justice Lowe, Gatlin Bear, Jeremiah McClellan, Ryan Pelham, Dallas Wilson, DeCorian Moore, Gary Bryant Jr., possible return in 2025, Evan Stewart, possible return in 2025. Did I miss anyone? Well, I mean, first of all, this guy is clearly an everydayer. I mean, Kevin, props. Listing the names like that, I mean, first of all, you're making my life easier, which I appreciate, but also the depth of knowledge is pretty solid. I fully expect there to be transfer portal departures. It might be one of the lower rated guys like Jack Ressler or, who is a promising 3-star wide receiver prospect himself. Maybe it's Dylan Gresham, who doesn't have the hype but does have the talent. I don't know. In the next 18 months, I would say, well, really 12 months, I fully expect at least one, if not more, wide receivers to transfer out. Kyler Casper is a name that I am so intrigued by. I've been a huge fan since I saw his film in high school and he committed to Oregon. He was a 2023 recruit. He reclassified to 2022. He hasn't had a major role. His talent level is immense. He is 6'5", 6'6", runs well, jumps well, ball skills. Like the plays that he's made in the spring game the last couple of years, he looks like a prototypical outside X receiver because he's someone who you can throw a 50-50 ball to. And I've also talked about him as a candidate to maybe make the switch and play tight end because he has that 6'6" frame. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. He's been in the weight room for a few years. I don't think he's going to have a huge role in the offense this season. He didn't last year, and I think Oregon, as you point out, is just completely stacked at the wide receiver position, but he's a guy who could very well get lost in the shuffle. I could also see him sticking it out because if he sticks it out for this season, it's hard to not see him as one of the top receiving options for Oregon come 2025 because, yeah, you're going to have DeCorian Moore. He's playing right away. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. After this season, Gary Bryant Jr. and Evan Stewart have decisions to make. I suspect neither one is back at Oregon next year. Gary Bryant would be the more likely of the two because Evan Stewart probably gets taken in the first, second, or third round of the NFL draft because he just has elite NFL wide receiver traits. I'm so excited to watch him with Dylan Gabriel this year. I think that's going to be the deep ball connection that Oregon had with both Bo Nix and Troy Franklin a year ago, who are, of course, now paired together on the Denver Broncos. And I love where the receiver room is at. I think it's deeper than it's ever been. I think it has as much high-end talent as it ever has, probably more. And Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden are for sure done after this year. I feel like Gary Bryant Jr. either goes to the NFL or transfers. Now, he's not as highly coveted of an NFL draft prospect as Evan Stewart would be. Yes, it's possible for either one to come back. I think about the 2025 receiver room as not having either of those guys in it, and if it does, then that's just an added bonus. And still the wide receiver room will be positively stacked. But Casper is an interesting one because with DeCorian Moore coming in, he still might not wind up with this as the top receiving option. I think he has that capability. I think he has that sort of talent. I just don't know if he's going to be able to separate himself in the receiver room because there's so many talented guys in there. I mean, we saw Jeremiah McLaughlin and Austin Novosad link up for what was just a gorgeous downfield back shoulder throw in the spring game, and working on a corner. I think it was Cam Alexander, the UTSA transfer, who's going to be in the rotation for the secondary this season. I think his talent level is really, really high, McLaughlin and Kyler Kaspers, but there are a lot of names, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a Justice Lowe or a Jack Ressler or a Dylan Gresham transfer out, or even a guy like Ryan Pelham if he's not going to see the field a ton, and if DeCorian Moore has taken the spot that he might have otherwise had. And that's just the way that it works when you recruit this many guys, but it's a great problem to have. And I don't think there is a number of receivers that could transfer that would make me feel concerned about, hey, no, they're not that deep, right? Like, unless half of these guys transfer out, which I cannot see happening and I don't think ever would, if you lose 2 or 3, yeah, it would sting a little. It would just mean, though, that the guys that are also in that room are outplaying them, are outperforming them, and are going to have a higher snap count. So I feel great about the wide receiver room. And, yeah, maybe they bring in a transfer next year to be an experienced headline guy, but I can see Oregon having a super young, relatively inexperienced, but, young, sort of, inexperienced, sort of receiving core next year. What I mean is your 2 headline guys, or 2 of them, could be Jurion Dickey, Kyler Kasper. And that's a former 5-star and a former highly rated 4-star recruit who will be going into their 3rd years of college football. Kasper actually will be going into his 4th. Dickey would be going into his 3rd. Now, they wouldn't have a ton of experience, so they don't have that many reps in games, but it's not as if they don't know the playbook or they haven't gone against Division I guys in practice for several years. I think they would be a really, really dynamic tandem, and I love what Junior Adams has done at that position. I think, frankly, the only way that you miss guys, or what I mean by miss guys, is the only way that you lose a significant number of guys where you'd miss them if they left, and you'd feel their loss, you'd be like, wow, it feels like we need to be getting more production there, is if Junior Adams leaves and takes several of these guys with him. Because like I said about Lanning earlier, recruiting is about relationships, and Adams has developed relationships at a high level. And, yeah, I mean, you bring in a pair of 5-star wideouts in 2025, safe to say they're going to have a chance to compete. I think the wide receiver room is going to be really, really open, and it's going to be a really intriguing position battle going into next season. But, yeah, great question there, Kevin. Speaking of Dallas Wilson, 5-star wideout, number 1 at his position in the state of Florida, tweeted out a video after he'd been recruited for the last couple months that he's staying locked into Oregon, which led to this question from Rick. After all the talk, saying it twice, about the Florida schools, including that one guy down in Miami, the one with the vanilla offense. Mario Cristobal just taking haymakers here from Rick. Trying to flip Dallas Wilson. How confident should we be with his commitment? What say you? I don't know of too many examples in which a recruit has put out a video saying, I'm not going anywhere. Because he has taken visits and offers and phone calls. I think the DeCorian Moore commitment helped lock this one down, because it's really easy for guys to picture, and by the way, receivers that I didn't mention, Cooper Perry, Isaiah Mosey, also in this 2025 class. And heck, there might be even more names that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head. But Dallas Wilson tweeting out a video makes me feel insanely confident. I would, it's nothing's 100%. Nothing's 100% until he has signed his name on the national letter of intent, lest we forget the Peyton Bowen debacle of the 2023 cycle. That was exciting. But I don't know why else he would put this out there unless he wanted to, let fans know, and the staff wanted to reaffirm fans that he is going to sign with Oregon come National Signing Day in the early window in December. So, yeah, I feel great about Dallas Wilson staying committed. I think he and DeCorian Moore give me major, different sort of players because they have different body types and such, but they give me major Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin vibes. And Dante Thornton and Troy Franklin weren't utilized to their fullest extent in their freshman years. In their sophomore years, they both took big steps forward and were impact players. Thornton is now, of course, at Tennessee and is expected to have a big year with the Vols, by the way. He did, I think, some good things last year, but I think he's one of those guys that's going to take a leap forward in production this year. But just same sort of vibe where they come in with big-time recruits or as big-time recruits, and they're going to have the opportunity to play. I like having that sort of tandem, and I don't want to overlook Cooper Perry and Isaiah Mosey. I mean, those two guys, really talented dudes. And you've got Ryan Pelham in the mix, and you've got Dylan Gresham in the mix, and Jack Ressler. Someone's going to transfer. I don't know who. I don't know when. It's not going to be ahead of this season. It'll be after the season. In December, there might be a couple of these guys who are in the transfer portal. But overall, I feel great about Oregon's wide receiver room. They'll be able to survive multiple departures that might take place following this 2024 season. But they're deep. They're talented, and their long-term outlook is as good as it has ever been. So that was a great question. Absolutely loved it. We're going back to the offensive side of the ball with the next question. Oregon's offense in the Big Ten. How good is it? Exactly. That's coming up next. You guys are just firing away with the outstanding questions here. This one from Matt. Does Oregon's offense need to adjust to the Big Ten or vice versa? What factors will dictate the outcome to this question? Same for defense. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. The dichotomy of Oregon's offense going against better defenses who are going against a better offense from Oregon is one of the most intriguing elements about going into the Big Ten this year, because stylistically across the conference on average, you don't have as strong of offenses. You do have great defenses. You play in colder climates. It's harder to score points. However, if Oregon is as good as we think they are, they're not going to have a tough time scoring points. If you look at what Ohio State has done in the Big Ten over the last several years, and I think from a talent and recruiting standpoint, that is who Oregon's peer is going into the Big Ten. They have had several games. This applies to Michigan the last couple of years as well, where they're playing Big Ten teams who they are just much better than, and the final score of the game was like 42-3 or 38-10, or these big blowouts because the worst kept secret. I mean, I don't know if it's the worst kept secret necessarily, but the middle and bottom of the Big Ten really hasn't been good the last few years. Adding the 4 schools, formerly the Pac-12, RIP, make that league significantly stronger in the middle. Like USC is going to be fighting to get out of the middle. I think they will. Washington will be in the middle this year, but as a program annually, I think is closer to the top than they are to the bottom, but I don't think they're all the way to the top, though Jed Fish is a very good coach. UCLA could be a bottom dweller. That I am not high on that particular hire. They're recruiting well, which is a good early sign. I just have no idea if Deshaun Foster can coach. He's got Eric Bieniemy as his offensive coordinator. I mean, that's a big name and that's flashy and everything, but why isn't he in the NFL? He got passed over for head coaching opportunities several times, and everyone kind of started to come up with theories as to why. And at the end of the day, some guys just might not be as good as they appear because, we'll see. He's got a chance to prove me wrong, but I have a question anytime you go from being an NFL offensive coordinator to being a college offensive coordinator. Maybe he just wanted to go back there because I think he has ties to the school one way or the other. But anyway, I'm getting too UCLA oriented here. I think Oregon going into the Big Ten is going to have plenty of chances to score. And are they going to, put up the numbers they did a season ago? Probably not, because they have Ohio State and Michigan on the schedule. The average Big Ten team has to adjust to Oregon's offense more than Oregon has to adjust to playing a great defense. Because I watched Oregon play a great defensive program in Utah last year, and they put up 35 points on the road. That was an 8-4 Utah team. No, their offense wasn't that good. Well, Oregon held them to 6 points. So, yeah, the defense had a really good day, not allowing a touchdown there. But Utah, a great defensive team and a great defensive program. The kind of team you'd say, oh, yeah, you got to watch out for the way they play defense, the way they do X, Y, and Z. Put up 35 points on the road. Had the backups in by the end of the game. I think they're going to be able to score. A lot of this comes down to matchups. A lot of these coaches who use different philosophies and schemes and play calls and whatnot have influences from all over the place, and this will be the first time a lot of them go up against each other. And that's one of the things that gets lost when a conference dissolves. is the tradition of these two schools matching up might have a long-running history between those coaches. And, every coach is different with how he wants to win games, what that should look like, the approach, the scheme, recruiting, everything is unique to that coach and the influence that he has had over time. But I think that for Oregon going into the Big Ten, it's more of an adjustment for the Big Ten defenses to try to slow down the Oregon offense. I mean, perfect example, Iowa last year. Let me check the score real quick. It was, so Iowa last year, great defense in the Big Ten. Great defense. They have one of the best defenses in college football every single year. They played Tennessee in their bowl game. Tennessee was not, hear me clearly, Tennessee was not a great SEC team a year ago. They weren't even that good. They played two legit teams, Georgia and Missouri. They got shellacked, 77-17 over those two games. Okay, they were not that good. They beat Iowa in their bowl game, 35-0, with a new quarterback who's a true freshman, Nico Iamaleava, who Oregon recruited once upon a time. I think in the modern world of college football, it's a bigger adjustment for defenses to play a great offense than it is for an offense to play a great defense. Because now that is team dependent. Because when you play a Georgia at its peak, or an old school Nick Saban defense, or a variety of these sorts of teams, it can be a different level of physicality and strength and size and speed for, all across the board than what you're used to. But in the Big Ten, I think Oregon's offense is going to be just fine. Now, a year ago, they averaged 44 points per game, 540 yards per, 530, somewhere in that range. Do I expect those numbers to be replicated? No, because Ohio State and Michigan, you're not going to score 40 points on either of those teams. Like that, especially on the road against Michigan. Ohio State's defense just got so much talent. You're not going to put up 40-plus in those particular matchups. Can you score over 30? Yeah, you absolutely can, because Oregon has the offense and the weapons. Defensively for the Ducks, I don't think they're going to change anything or adapt to, the conference in a way that, alters what sort of approach they have to take. Every team is just different. This team runs this sort of philosophy. This team is more ground heavy. This team wants to control the clock. And they face those same sorts of differing schemes in the Pac-12 over the years. You think of the great Stanford teams, right? That was always a different sort of matchup that required a different sort of game plan than going up against Mike Leach's Washington State teams. That same principle still applies in the Big Ten. You just have to, what's the best way to phrase this? You're just going to face more teams that are more along the lines of a Stanford than you are a Washington State. That's what, different Big Ten offenses means to me. But good question. Lastly for today's show, before I get out of here, Joey Harrington stopped by to see if Nike, they released the whole video, could update the Generation O uniforms with the O on the helmet. And look, I'm a big fan of the O. We all love the O. As Dan Lanning said in his pregame speech to Colorado last year, does that O mean something to you? Because it means something to me. Well, yeah, I put myself in that particular camp. I love the O on the helmet, and the full uniform reveal is slated for Thursday, July 18th. But the initial helmet reveal gave me major 2015 Rose Bowl against Florida State vibes. Apple green, not quite as aptly. I feel like the green that they have on this helmet is just a little bit darker. You can go check out Locked On Ducks on Twitter or Oregon Football and see it over there. I retweeted what they put out. I think it looks great. Excited to see what the rest of the uniform ends up looking like. But I like the helmet, and having the O on the side and nothing else there, I think is awesome. The first generation O uniforms, they had the wings on the black helmet, silver wings, black helmet. I think it looks great. I love the wings on the helmet. I also love the traditional O, and I think the different helmet decals are kind of an underrated part of the Oregon uniforms over the last couple of years, because like the old school duck logo on the throwbacks against Washington State in the Fiesta Bowl, absolutely fantastic. I think the O looks really, really good. I think the wings are great. Like, they just don't miss on the helmets very often. And, what we've seen is the helmet, and I think it looks great. And I'm excited to see what the rest of it looks like. I'm a big fan of that apple green sort of color. One of my favorite uniforms was 2011 against Cal. the introduction of the apple green with the Fighting Ducks, and I think they went black helmets, black pants, and had the Fighting Ducks logo on the side. Thought it was fantastic. So all that sort of stuff, I'm definitely here for it. But that's the next step in the Generation O reveal. More will come on Thursday, so we'll just have to wait and see. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.